and give a bit of run through of today. There might be a couple more people joining, so apologies if you get the dings. So we run this session every year. I think this is now the 5th or 6th iteration now of a group peer review. And really the aim of this space is just to provide year-on-year support to improve our reporting as a sector and as institutions through the Public Bodies Climate Change Duty reports, and really create and facilitate a space for you to ask questions of your sector peers and of EAUC Scotland and to share your experiences. So please do make use of the chat function. Do interrupt me at any point as well. Do ask questions of each other. It's and to be a more engaging space. If you do, I'm going to change this a little bit because I can't see people landing. Ah, great. Yeah, if you do have two screens, really helpful to maybe have one with the Teams chat and the slides, and having your own Public Bodies report on the right-hand side or wherever the other screen is, so you can just do a side-by-side check. In terms of the structure for today, we're just going to do a quick update on where we're at in terms of reporting. And based on the feedback we've had from yourself from last year, as well as sector developments, for example, I thought this year would change the format a little bit and really focus more time on key areas where our analysis of the sector's reports identifies areas we can make relatively quick improvements on. These particularly relate to leadership and governance, the procurement tab, adaptation, and wider influence. And for each of these, we won't be going through all the reporting questions, but we'll have target discussion on some of the key questions within each of these for those quick wins. Though after we've gone through all these different areas, there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions on any other part of the report, or if you want to get a sense check for how others are approaching it, we'll have that time. We've set aside 2 hours for the session, and we'll have a break halfway through. We may not use it all, but we've got the time there, which is great. So hopefully that sounds okay. And I'll dive straight in. So just in terms of reporting update, as you've largely experienced, just acknowledge that the reporting template did take longer to be published this year compared to previous years. I will stress that this holdup was really a consequence of Scottish Government re-tendering for the reporting service, of which SSN, who's done it historically, did win the contract, and they'll run this for another 3 years. But the delay lies with Scottish Government rather than SSN. So I appreciate there's been frustrations because there's been internal sign-off processes, etc., and that's been challenging for some institutions. But fingers crossed, a blip, and next year back onto being smooth. Hopefully in July, templates being released when the new conversion factors are out. Just flag, the template hasn't materially changed compared to last year, except that the conversion factors have been updated. Looking ahead, though, in 2027, it is expected that a new reporting platform will be used and moving towards hopefully a digital platform rather than Excel-based. So that is the plan. So potentially in 18 months' time, be engagement with public bodies around a more user-friendly tool, asking better questions. So as soon as we know the opportunities regarding collaborating with SSN on that, I will let you know, because that's a really great opportunity. We know feedback from the sector, digital processing, better questions will be really helpful. And just lastly, in terms of some of the backdrop to this year's reporting, there is an increasing level of scrutiny of reports. So Audit Scotland is really taking an increased role here, and including a review of public bodies' data as part of the auditing evidence of colleges and universities. So just a reminder ahead of submitting this year that these reports are part of a wider legal structure. They carry weight and will increasingly carry weight as that scrutiny is increasing. It's very intentional there. So just keep in mind, in terms of responses as part of public bodies reports, do be clear, do be transparent, and have depth to your responses as well. Lastly, I will do a follow-up after today, but if you would like me to do, or if you'd like to do a one-to-one review with another institution, do let me know. An interested folk, I'll pair up. So that's just an opportunity for you to swap reports. Again, just get a sense of how other people are approaching things. A second pair of eyes is always really helpful, particularly on the mission section. They've all been tagged to the right scope. In the comments, for example, are you adding enough detail around the methodology, etc. I'm also really happy to receive drafts. I've had 3 through already and provided some feedback. That is on a sort of a first come first serve basis, and it's based on my capacity as well. So I think last year I had about 10 reports, managed to get them all back to you. But if that's helpful, do let me know, and I will really try to get through and provide feedback, and hopefully that's useful to you. So I think that's it in terms of setting sort of a context. So what we'll do, we'll go through these different areas, leadership and governance, procurement, and highlight some questions and some prompts to reflect on, and really welcome your thoughts, questions, and discussion. So looking at the governance section, so if you got the public body report up, there's the tab on governance, and there's 8 questions there. But I really want to focus just now on the first 2, and that is, how is climate change governed in the body, and how is climate change action managed and embedded in the body? I will say, just because I've said, I've just come off Zoom this morning, so I can't actually see any of you at the moment. So if you want to ask a question, do just interrupt me, please do. In terms of governance, what we're finding is a lot of the questions in public bodies reports don't help if you're just reading the question and answering the question. You really have to have the SSN guidance alongside it to really understand what is the question asking. And we find that for these first 2 questions. For the first part of how is climate change governed in the body, you really want to focus on the relationship between the board of management, your trustee board, and your senior leadership team. So it's asking for really board level KPIs. Is climate risk escalated to corporate risk register if it's appropriate? How often are sustainability updates given to the board? And who is the senior leader sponsor for sustainability? So it's really looking at that relationship at the top 2 layers there. Got an example graphic on the right hand side, so really something simple but really good. This is from Glasgow Clyde College that they included last year's report, and the same again this year. And this can really help just give a visualization of what you're talking about in relation to 2A and 2B. So that 2A section really focuses for Glasgow Clyde College on the board of management and the exec management team. 2B, the question is, how is climate change action managed and embedded in the body? And here it's really focusing on how does the institution operationalize sustainability, and how is progress against the climate change duties reported upwards. So you can, for example, reference, do you have dedicated staff resource for sustainability, be that part of a role, a full role? Do you have a sustainability committee or committees tackling different areas? If you do, include the name of it, the membership, what the different roles represented, how often do they meet, and who do they report to? What's those reporting relationships like in the institution? This last bit, how do they assess, manage and monitor sustainability issues? This actually comes from a guidance note from Audit Scotland. So their notes to their auditors is look at 2B and understand how do they assess, manage and monitor sustainability issues. So is there an internal sustainability action plan, for example, that your committee is referring to and monitoring action and progress against? Again, reference it there. And then lastly, are there any other forms of operational management? So is sustainability devolved to different departments, and they have their own sustainability action plans and decision-making processes there as well? If so, do include them. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment, or I'll come out there and sleep that up. Any sort of questions on that part, or maybe looking, I'll give you a couple of minutes as well just to reflect on maybe what you've written so far, or what has been written before you're using as a template. And yeah, welcome any questions or reflections. William.
It was really to ask, you're asking for this in the governance for this year. We've been lucky enough to appoint a full-time member of staff to the role, and the governance and the KPIs will change going forward from this month. But I'm aware that the data's from last year. We will be putting new strategies in, but using the data from last year. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. You can refer to the old ones and just put a subnote saying this is the recent change. That's not a problem. That's really helpful from an external point of view as well, because these are public documents. So anyone who wants to check out what's happened with the institution gets a really good up-to-date overview if you do that way.
Okay.
Anything else for people that's coming up? Any challenges in terms of answering these questions? Elsa?
Yes, I would say that we are quite challenged by answering some of these questions, because we're from a very small organisation, and I think that's great that some colleges do have somebody full-time doing this, and we can't necessarily afford to do such a thing, particularly in these straitened times for all colleges. And we have had an internal audit review saying all these marvellous things that we should do, but actually the cost of doing all these marvellous things is quite tricky. So yes, I am quite challenged by some of those questions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, do you have any other internal mechanisms you can describe? So through, I don't know, committees. It might not be a sustainability committee, but it might be, for example, business operations continuity committee. Do they discuss sustainability, even if it's maybe a quarterly, twice a year? Can you reference that sort of structure? Is that possible?
We can reference board committees. We can reference a health and safety committee, but not really much other than that, I would say.
I mean, I wouldn't worry. I mean, in the sense of, if that's the reality, just describe the reality of that. And I think, we've got to appreciate the context of different institutions as well. For other, New Battle Abbey College, for example, they're very small and didn't have a dedicated sustainability professional, same as others. So from an external point of view, Elsie, if you want to share as well what you put, and I can sort of sense check as well, is the narrative clear? Because I appreciate it's not, if it's meshed around different areas, it's quite challenging to communicate it.
I suppose what worries me is you're then saying that Audit Scotland are looking very closely into this, and I suppose that's a slight concern, but without knowing what exactly they're looking into, I probably won't not sleep tonight.
So on that, I will share around the guidance note, and they're pulling out bits around embedding sustainability decision making in financial planning, for example. They're trying to understand the decision making processes, and recognizing there are significant constraints across the public sector regarding sustainability expertise, skill sets, and capacity to deliver. But I'll share that round. And I know from Scottish Council's point of view as well, they really appreciate the different circumstances across the sector as well.
Okay, that'll be helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Sinead.
Yeah, just really to reiterate what Elsa's saying, I'm from another very, very small college, and I think that all of these forms and reporting mechanisms, at the risk of repeating myself from a meeting this morning about another data reporting requirement. There's a disproportionate burden on the smaller colleges, and I think what government just simply fails to understand is there's nobody here. I'm the principal and I'm coming to your meeting because there's nobody else to do that, and that's taking up time in my diary. My role is not a strategic one, it's an operational one, and there are no teams or departments or committees here. There are just a very few of us trying to keep the wheels on, and all of these are a terrible burden on us, because the extensive reporting, which we'd love to do, and we'd love to I'm a professor of sustainability, as you know, Matthew, so it's uppermost in my mind and front of my heart, but I have literally nobody here to do this work, never mind to report to you that I'm not doing any of this work. So it's a difficult situation. So just really wanted to say that Ailsa is not the bad student, and that these forms really are predicated on the basis that everyone has an estates team or a sustainability committee, and that some sensitivity would be appreciated, that those mechanisms don't and can't always exist. And I just want to say again, for the record, what I say in every meeting, there's a disproportionate burden of reporting on these tiny colleges. I am in UHI Orkney. I operate as a school within a college, within a university, and I have all the data reporting of a school and a college and a university. So Aberdeen University and I have the same reporting requirements. All the colleges in the Central Belt, MC Colin there from Edinburgh College, I have the same reporting requirements as Colin, and I have the same reporting requirements as a high school, and there is just me. So just to back Ailsa, sorry. Troublemakers from the edges.
Not at all. No, I really appreciate that, and I think something trying to do today is focus on those quick wins, to recognize this is an intensive exercise, and what we're finding is, like, some of the information that's provided, it's obviously people have spent time putting this information, and what might be a shame is it's like actually it's not answering what's necessarily needed. So it's like, if you've got an hour on this part of the tab, I really want to help you make sure you spend that hour answering the parts of the questions the Scottish Government are really wanting. And I say the public bodies report doesn't help itself, because the questions sometimes are not the best, and you have to go into the guidance really. So I'm hoping today is a good steer to say, actually, this is the key information you need. And I feel like it's like when go back to high school and the teachers are saying, point, evidence, explain. Here's the framework to answering this question. But I definitely hear you. And that's something we communicate back to the Scottish Funding Council regularly. And I know Eva, who's their net zero lead internally, appreciates that as well. And I think separately for the UHI group, I think there's a discussion as well with the Scottish Funding Council and UHI about how EAUC Scotland can support you more on that basis as well. But thank you both. Any other things coming up for folks before we move on to the procurement section? No? Okay. If anything does pop up, do pop it in the chat. Otherwise, I will move on. And apologies for folk who joined the APC call the other day. There's a bit of a crossover from slides from there, just briefly. But looking at sustainability and procurement and where we're at, there's two opportunities to report regarding procurement in the public bodies report. There's the emission side in that third tab, or the third sets of questions, and then there's the separate qualitative reporting of sustainability processes on that procurement tab. Really positive from last year's reports, we find 74% of universities and 50% of colleges are now using the EAUC Scope 3 supply chain emissions tool to report their supply chain emissions, which is really great to see. In terms of qualitative side, we're finding examples of effective reporting practices, but generally the responses could be more relevant and targeted to the report questions. So again, just making sure that when we're updating these and we're spending an hour on them, let's put it into best use there. So just in terms of the emissions tool, I'll follow up with the link to that tool that you can use. But generally, the feedback is 45 minutes, an hour, you're able to get your data, clean it up, and submit it into question 3B on the emissions and projects tab. As a minimum, if you're going to be including these emissions, what you should include is you head over to emissions and projects, question 3B. In the metrics, it's spend data. That's how they do the analysis. So £sign spent. And then you add either your total, in this case, and then in the commentary, just adding Scope 3 supply chain emissions derived from EAUC Scope 3 supply chain emissions tool, double counted emissions removed. So as part of that cleaning data up, just making sure any emissions we've reported elsewhere, so that's usually your heating, electricity use, water, business travel, waste, for example, they're often reported elsewhere, and you get much better data quality because it's metered data. It's directly from your suppliers, for example. So you want to remove that data before you're submitting your Scope 3 supply chain emissions. So that's sort of as a minimum level in terms of best practice for reporting that. In terms of if you want to be more transparent, you can just break it down by the different categories from EAUC. I think it's wrong, maybe 11 and 12. But as you can see here, it's the same setup. This is from University of Aberdeen's last year, but same metric, but then just breaking down into the different procurement categories here. So breaking out construction, business services, ICT, etc., catering. So just in terms of a general member of the public, we have access to that data, and it's a bit more transparent. I'd say majority of the sector is reporting these emissions. If you're going to report them for the first time, then really important in 3A, there's an overall summary of total reported emissions. And you just want to add a note saying, when you've done this year's full report, an explanatory note saying Scope 3 supply chain emissions have been reported for the first time. And that's just a quick narrative to explain what, there's a big jump in Scope 3 emissions between the last reporting year and this one. And that just explains why there. Also really helpful with staff changes in future, people trying to understand what are all these different historical trends as well. Looking now at the procurement tab itself, which is the qualitative side, and just really focusing on those first two questions. So the first one being, how have procurement policies contributed to compliance with the climate change duties? And then how has procurement activity contributed to compliance with STEM duties? Really important to note here is that, again, it's in the guidance, not in that clear in the report itself. But what we find is quite a lot of institutions simply reference the sustainable procurement duty when actually it's asking about the climate change duty. Though there's overlap between the two, it's asking for more clarity here. So what we suggest is that sustainability and procurement leads should add information here on what sustainable procurement policies are in place. That could be a sustainable procurement strategy, a purchasing policy, for example. Excuse me. And how do those policies or strategies contribute to the three pillars of the climate change duties? So the first one's around reducing carbon emissions. The second one is around climate risk and resilience and adaptation. And the third one is around acting sustainably and wider sustainability benefits. So, for example, big one for procurement, looking at, for example, community benefits and wealth building, circular economy, green jobs, those sorts of things. So it's really asking about how does your policy and strategies align to these objectives. Also important to add, who's responsible for ensuring it's implemented, who has that sign off, for example. If it's a strategy, is it running for 3 years, 5 years, and how often is it reviewed? So is it something that is in place for multiple years, but it's reviewed every year? or is it simply next review date is going to be in 2 or 3 years' time? So again, just trying to streamline your answers to fit here. And just an example, this is from City of Glasgow College, their report last year. So what strategies and policies in place? That first paragraph there, really clear. It's got a link to the strategy that can be accessed. It's got the timeline 2022 to 2026. Skipping to the end, it kind of says, the governance structure is reviewed annually by the head of procurement, and it was adopted into the main institutional strategy in 2023. And then in between, it pulls out some of the main relationships with the climate change duties. So, for example, looking at building climate literacy, both within the college and the supply chain. So I know that as a follow-up, they've done the e-learning module here as part of the college, a focus on reuse, redesign, so supporting the circular economy and also reducing emissions within the supply chain. So again, nothing referencing the sustainable procurement duties here, just trying to align to the climate change duties. And this is their full answer. So it doesn't have to be a massive amount, but it's just trying to tweak and target to that. In terms of the second part, it's really looking for case study actions. So you've got your policy and strategy in place. Can you show how that's been operationalized and delivering benefits, whether that's been realized or it's just like we expect these benefits to be achieved? So ideally, 2 examples would be wonderful about how you've taken what you've described in 5A and how it's been put into practice. So example framing of here is, below are examples of how the above policies have resulted in procurement activities that contributes to compliance with the climate change duties. You can just put in a title for the case study. What did your college or university do? You could break it down. You might not hit all these, but we believe this would intend benefits in terms of reducing emissions by reducing the purchase of goods and services, climate risk, shortening supply chains, for example, by using reuse and repair from a local business, acting sustainably. We're embedding community wealth building, for example, in this contract, and this is what it's achieving. Then, if possible, what benefits have actually been realized to date? And you might not have that, but if you do, really good to include. So just some examples again, and they're not huge. I think there's a thing to say, it doesn't have to be a massive amount of text. So a great example from Glasgow Caledonian University a couple of years ago, demonstrating the university proactively engaging with their supply chain with the aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving internal decision making and emissions reporting. So the case study here is just describing they took the data from the EAUC Scope 3 supply chain tool, identifying suppliers who are critical within that. Maybe, for example, 14 suppliers represented 41% of the identified emissions. So going to the suppliers and asking questions, what is your net zero strategy, for example? What sort of activities do you have in place? That's a really powerful way of gathering more information and seeing how the institution can support that business as well. Similarly, an example from University of Strathclyde, and this is their university new travel policies from 2024, and describing some of the links with procurement being involved in that process, and just some expected benefits. So, for example, looking at mainland UK travel being done by non-flights as a default, for example, and the expectation that's going to reduce emissions, looking at the default class of travel as well in purchasing decisions. So again, it doesn't have to be a significant amount, but it's just good to have 1 or 2 of these case studies. And the last one from City of Glasgow College again, so I mentioned the e-learning module. So they put this one in here. Really good framing. It's like, this is the title, here's our approach, we developed this module. These are what we think we're hoping to achieve, increasing climate literacy of purchasers across the college. By doing so, we nudge behaviours. And then, what's been achieved to date, they're not quite sure, but, we're going to look more into it. I'll stop sharing my screen there. And again, just give you a moment to sort of reflect on questions 5A and 5B on your own reports for a couple of minutes, and then open up to any questions or reflections there. Rose.
Given that Audit Scotland have said they're going to be a bit more focused on responses and submissions, have they given any additional expectations to do with procurement, especially considering the updated public bodies guidance has kind of stepped back a little bit from being really focused on procurement needs? We are a relatively small university and my procurement team is one person now, and asking them to do high level of engagement with our supply chain has been on our to-do list for a long time, and theirs, and it's just not something we can necessarily see even over the next 3 years, for example. I know you said before they've tried to be allowing and accommodating given the current financial crisis, but how far do we need to push for procurement outreach, for example?
Ooh, great question. Definitely understand the draft statutory guidance stepping back. At the same time, conflictingly, the Cabinet Secretary wrote to all public bodies highlighting the new route template and explicitly saying the role of supply chains being really important here, and recognising that X billion pounds of public sector spend and nudging that. So slightly conflicting messages in there. But I think, as always with the climate change duties, it's really recognising what's our institutional capacity, expertise in this area, and having a proportionate response there. So as long as that's been sort of discussed and squared, you could say actually we're not in a position to do more than what we're doing, and that's fair enough. Separately to this call, and so people are aware, there is work to maybe do some alignment across the whole sector to support supply chains, called the Edinburgh Pathway. Again, that's a way of hopefully overcoming some of these capacity challenges that the sector faces as well. So I imagine in future, if there's momentum behind that, that will really help. We can evidence action as a whole sector as well as individually as well.
Thanks.
Rose, and then Colin. So, Jude. Oh, you're mute.
Thank you. I always find this quite overwhelming each time I go to do this. So just to reassure others, it is a bit of a nightmare, and I think everybody feels pretty much the same. So don't worry too much. I requested our Scope 3 emissions from EAUC, and I got a report through with so much information, so many different tabs on this spreadsheet, this workbook, and I couldn't make head nor tail of it. So there seemed to be one extreme to the other. It's like 1 minute you don't really get very much, and then the next minute you're getting this massive amount of information and data that I don't even know where to start. Was that quite a normal, saying that you had this meeting with EAUC, has that been quite a normal response, that they're sending out this massive amount of data that doesn't make an awful lot of sense? And I think we're about to triple our emissions from what I can gather.
I think that tripling, absolutely. That'd be across the board. I'll pop in the link, a guide we wrote with EAUC, just to do a walkthrough of how you sort of clean that data, and it's a step by step, because from someone who's never seen the data set, it's like, where do you start? That's why we've done this guide from that. And we did a slight walkthrough, and Lauren sent through some prompts as well, so I'll pop them in the chat. But generally we find with the walkthrough, and you also need to identify from your procurement team which are the suppliers you're reporting elsewhere. So who's your energy providers, who's your water providers, business travel, for example, because you're reporting them elsewhere usually. So you have to try and clean it. This walkthrough tells you how to do that. So generally we find that, my experience, I did it for City Glasgow College last year, it took an hour. just kind of going through and cleaning it. So it takes a bit of time, but I definitely feel you. When I first got that spreadsheet, I was like, wow, okay. Yeah.
Right, okay. I think I did try, but it just seems to have lumped everything in together. I can't believe that is, because we've got to separate it out, haven't we? And is that what you're talking about, that we'll be able to separate the scope 3 from the scope 2?
Yeah, so you'll get everything that you've spent, you get the breakdown of emissions. What you've got to do is then remove the emissions you're reporting elsewhere in the report. So your scope 1, scope 2, some of your scope 3 is already reported elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
So there's a bit of cleaning up to there too, but you'll still get a big figure.
Yes.
That's the reality.
Right. And a bit of double handling then.
That's trying to remove that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. Okay, so Rose, do you want to come back on anything June said, or do you want a separate question?
Yeah, just really quickly for June. Totally appreciate the HESCOT tool is a lot. What you get from APC is a lot. Recommend going to the final tab. It literally says HESA Scope 3 figures. That will have all of your summaries there. The key places to interrogate is the classification called waste and water. You should already have separate water data to pull out. And then just double check waste, because you might, or you'll be already having waste separately, so you can check your waste supplier isn't captured in that category. Everything else is fine. Don't look at the numbers too much. It's the best we've got, but there are acknowledged some issues with it. And I will say all the English universities and colleges are very jealous that we get this pre-populated for us by APUC. They have to do it all manually and it takes them forever. If you have any questions, I do this every year. I love spreadsheets. If you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat and you can contact me if you want to have a separate call or something, or walk through next week or anything. Just get in touch.
Thanks so much, Rose. That very, very kind offer. Yeah, I also seen the chat about accessing the data as well, and just recognizing there might be a hold up from APUC if your institution is still needing to submit your end of year spend data to APUC. So if you can't access the data yet, speak with APUC and your internal procurement team as well, because it just might be a case of getting the data to APUC as soon as you can. Colin.
Yep, it was just to share really with everyone what we do and what we've done is we made the decision as a college that our sustainability officer could take voluntary severance a couple of years ago. So obviously, when a post gets is allowed to take voluntary severance, we can't replace them. So we haven't done that. We've also but what we've done is we made the decision just to freeze what we report at the time that person left. So we report our other in tab 3A, 3B, sorry. We report our procurement as other, and we've left the comment in that our sustainability officer put in 2 years ago that it's unreliable data. So we are still reporting our operational carbon. We're not going to, because it would, in our case, it would triple our existing emissions. So we're just reporting the figure, but not including it in the emissions. And then in the procurement tab, questions in 5, we've managed to get our procurement manager to write the responses. So I just edit his words, but I don't actually write any of it. And that was something we did start even when we had the sustainability officer. So we kind of make our procurement APUC team do the work for us. And I think that's something that they've taken on, because they've also got the from here till 2030 reviews, and we do those in the institution every 3 to 6 months as well. So our understanding is APUC should all provide the same service to every institution. So if we're getting it from our APUC people, then everyone else should get the same benefits.
Yeah,
so
that's great. Yeah, do draw on your procurement colleagues. I think the only thing to say is to give them a steer on what the question's asking, because I think that's the challenge I'm seeing is, the procurement lead will think sustainable procurement duty, which is very fair. So I think go to your procurement colleagues and give them a steer and say, can you map it against these?
Yeah.
And usually get a great response.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Colin. Stefan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, our procurement emissions are a bit of a mix between the HASCAT tool calculations, quite a bit. It's getting more supplier data where we contact suppliers to see if they can give us actual emissions from the products we're buying. And also then, so for example, construction is usually recalculated in-house if it's mainly materials. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of reporting, can we then throw that all into one pot, or should it be highlighted that some emissions are from suppliers, some emissions were from HASCAT, because there are actually quite big differences. For example, what HASCAT calculated for, let's say, lab equipment was a very big difference compared to what we then got from lab equipment suppliers. So should we separate those out, or should that be in one?
I think it's fine to keep it as one, but in the commentary note, just reflect, this is a combination of headset use of the headset tool and supplier delivered information as well. I think there's always going to be a sense of this is less granular data as it is, and is the supplier counting their scope 3s as well as it just scope 1, scope 2 as well. So there's it is a bit challenging, but I think it'd be fine to put it as one, as long as in the methodology bit and that comment you just say it's a combination.
Thank you.
Any other questions or reflections for the procurement section? Rose.
Sorry, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. This is just a query to everyone that has actually looked at their HASCAT data and have looked at it previously. Have you noticed any swings or big changes? Because we've obviously had a contraction of operations as an institution. We've not been spending as much. So our emissions in some areas have dropped quite a lot with regards to procurement. So I'm wondering if any other institutions have noticed something similar, or we've just had a really good year for some reason.
No, ours went up, Rose, because we spent quite a lot of capital with one company, so that seems to have skewed it with our FM company. So that was all included. So when I asked about it, I was told that the reporting's getting better for the financial spend. They're actually tracking it better. So and I think they also included the grant, the Scottish Government grant that we received as well. So our one just went through the roof this year, or this last reporting year.
We've definitely seen something similar where in our medical school have bought a new MRI machine, and that's just skyrocketed off the same. So yeah, it definitely can have experienced those swings before.
And feel free, thinking your example there, Colin, of imagine that's the GPZ's funding that the college might have. That can be added in a comment as well for institutions. If you've got a big pot, so some have got a couple of million through GPZs. Historically, it's like actually this activity is happening. It's driven up the supply chain emissions as well. Feel free to add that notes. So Neil just coming in and saying, reflecting IT and software emissions are really on the rise as well, moving towards more digital services, but a drop in estate activity. Yeah. Neil.
Yeah, just I suppose to add to that, probably highlights the importance for all of us engaging with suppliers, because I believe in the past we've spoken to Microsoft about this, and a large proportion of our spend will be Microsoft, and they have claims that their products or their kind of Office 365 is net zero, but obviously that's not reflected in the conversion factors that APOC use. I'm not familiar with those conversion factors and where there's a huge amount of work that goes on. I think is it Leeds that does a lot of that. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I imagine right across the sector we're probably every organization here has a large spend contract with Microsoft and other similar suppliers, especially on the hardware side. So yeah, it'd just be interesting. I feel like one where we could definitely get more accurate data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned it before, and I'll pop a link in the chat around the Edinburgh pathway. This is going to start kicking off in discussions around maybe whole sector approach to sustainability in supply chains. And this is inspired by NHS England, who have set out a similar framework, basically saying to their suppliers, if you're a non-SME, we expect emissions data. We expect net zero targets to be in place within the next 2-3 years. If you're SNME, you get another 2 years grace before this kicks in for you. But it's all the NHS bodies in England asking the same questions of their supply chain and then getting the same data back. So avoiding duplication, and Edinburgh's keen to explore this replication across the Scottish sector for college and university again. So hopefully addressing some of these data challenges, addressing some of the capacity challenges as well. SMC variation. You have to expand on that one. I don't know that there's a new acronym for me. I think in terms of the work group, that's going to start off small to medium college. Thank you. Hopefully kicking off, I think, this month in February. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Luke, do you want to come in on your question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, no, it was just, I think it was just picking up on that where institutions have kind of looked at that kind of supplier-driven data for emissions, but maybe don't have that kind of comprehensively. So they've kind of got for certain categories, they've managed to kind of establish the value that they're happy for. And then they're maybe combining that with kind of a cost-based model to kind of complete the circle. Effectively, because you've got those kind of two methodologies kind of competing with each other. How are you kind of managing that, and how do you, how do the numbers compare, really?
I think well, Stephen was mentioning that before. So Stephen, do you want to come to you? Maybe
sorry if I missed that earlier, perhaps.
Yeah, so we started contacting our main suppliers, sort of the biggest ones in terms of emissions, of if they have actual emissions data of the products they're buying. So IT and lab equipment were the first ones. Most of the big ones do have something. And they also tend to be quite happy to explain to you, and we're actually very quick to get back to us to send us data. And in terms of how we combine them, it's simply if I have one supplier where I have, let's say, full data on all the products, that supplier comes out of our procurement list, and the emissions go there instead of going into the HASCAD tool. Some offer data on some products. So again, then I get the value of whatever that product, what the cost was of that product comes out, and add the emissions that they provided afterwards. So it's really just taking out where I got better data from, compared to HASCAD. And in terms of differences, some of them are quite different. I mentioned lab equipment tends to be on HASCAD, I think, much higher. A lot of it, I think, depends on who the supplier is and where they come from, because HASCAD doesn't really take into account whether that's delivered from Europe, the UK, or globally. There's only one. Some other ones are actually not that different. So I think what we looked at, sort of stationary things like that, are quite similar on HASCAD compared to what we get from suppliers. So it really depends. IT tends to be quite different as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just to highlight that, it sounds like a case study already for 5B in terms of how enacting sustainable procurement, asking supply chain these questions. That's a case study already for your 5B, which is really good. Sorry, interrupts, but go on.
Yeah, it was just on, I don't know, I was kind of engaged a while ago as well with, I can't remember, it was more targeted English universities. There was a research project, I think it was out of Nottingham or Nottingham Trent, that was kind of leading it on a tool effectively that they'd kind of established on that way. And I know that there was it was more focused on English institutions as well. I think there was some resistance from APUC, I think, for Scottish institutions to kind of engage with that. But basically the tool was kind of doing a lot of that legwork, already, where it pre-populated a lot of the data. I don't know if anyone had, be handy if I could remember what it was called now, but some people might be familiar with it.
I don't know where it's at the moment. I'm going to pop a link in the chat. And it's right down the bottom because we combined different tools. The net zero carbon supplier tool, net zero plus futures. So it's from there. Yeah, know what you mean. Rose.
I think something to say though, as considering the updated public bodies guidance is now saying we don't need to be as concerned with procurement when it comes to reporting, for example. So I know a lot of colleges here will be balking at even the look of HESCA alone, let alone trying to engage with your supply chain, being able to pull out data. I think just being reflective on the updated guidance, realizing that you can only do so much is really key. And some guidance we've had previous years is if we all start doing different methodologies for calculating procurement, it's very hard to compare between everyone. So it's kind of like apples and oranges. So if you are in a fortunate position to be able to talk to your supply chain and pull out the data, personally, I do think it is better to put it on a separate line in your reporting, because you're able to go, this is a higher quality data. So for example, what I do for business travel, I have data from our travel provider and I have data from expense claims. Expense claims, I have low confidence in that data, but I have high confidence in the travel provider data, and they are all broken down separately. Similar thing you should do with procurement, because otherwise the assumption is everyone uses HESCA. And then it's not an accurate representation. So splitting it out, I think, is a more transparent way of doing it. But yeah, just falling back on my previous thing, procurement isn't as big of a problem for us now with regards to net zero. So in terms of tracking it, just be reflective of your own capacity, because you'll drive yourself nuts. I tried to do it for 6 months to work out to do something a bit more accurate than HESCA, and honestly, it's not worth it, especially if you're a small team.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with reporting, about recognise your own internal capacity as well, and proportionality there is really key. And just recognise in terms of the emissions side for procurement, again, as Russ said, we're not expected to set a percentage reduction target against procurement emissions. The idea of reporting emissions is really that it gives you a tool to engage with suppliers later down the road and try and improve decision making. You don't need to be too focused on the number itself. Paula.
Hi, everyone. So I'm not sure what I'm about to say is particularly clever. We're still going to do it. Rose, I think you mentioned something along the lines in one of the last webinars we were. And if you're interested, get in touch. So just recognizing what Rose said, that, the focus is around perhaps reporting, but less action on scope 3 HESCA data. What we think, or what we would like to do, is understand what our supply chain is doing. What proportion of our suppliers acknowledge the climate emergency? What proportion of suppliers are demonstrating action on the climate emergency? And our aspiration is that with time, we do business with suppliers that acknowledge and act on the climate emergency. And the benefit of doing that is companies that acknowledge the problem are likely to be working on a solution. So they are likely to have more energy efficient products, stronger circular economy characteristics, and so on. So how are we planning to do this? We are hoping to be able to use APAC's EcoVadis sustainability questionnaire. I don't know if we can ask this, and I don't know if anyone from APAC's here, but we're sitting in on a training session next week. We hope that we can ask our suppliers, have you got a climate neutrality commitment? And what are your emissions for a particular point in time in the contract you have with us? And then whenever the reaccreditation cycle comes in, they report new emissions, and we're looking for scope 1 and 2. So with that data, we hoped that in the not too distant future, we can say X percentage of our spend is with companies acting on the climate emergency. A few years later, we can say it's more. And I think that's probably the most we can do to direct our spending power towards action on the climate emergency. So probably didn't make too much sense, but I would love to have a unified set of questions, because we all use APAC. And we all, through our procurement team, should have access to EcoVadis. So if you want to be involved, ping me a message. I'll put my email. And this doesn't help you report this year. I understand that, but just maybe next year. Anyway, I hope that's
It'll
of
help
interest.
It will help us for next year. Totally agree, Paolo. That's what is on my very long to-do list, is to start mapping our spend against our EcoVadis profiles that we have and see hotspots where we can find big suppliers from our spend categories that aren't actually on EcoVadis. Definitely something that we are wanting to do once I clone myself and my procurement team several times. But yeah, love to be involved with that.
Let's have a chat.
Fab, and again, going back to those case studies, if you are engaging suppliers this way, that's a great case study. Ivona.
Hi, Ivona here from Uni of Edinburgh. I work with Sean on procurement. So thanks, Matt, for shouting out the Edinburgh Pathway, which is exactly what kind of Paolo describes is a way to have a clearer kind of message and a nudge to the supply chain. And then on the questionnaire front, we're actually we were speaking to APUC, and they're about to launch a Section 1 questionnaire, which will ask exactly the type of questions that you mentioned there. So that's very much in the works, and I think it will be launching imminently if it's not live already. So at supplier level, you should be able to see what is their carbon reduction plan. Do they have one in place in the first place, or what's included in their organizational carbon emissions reporting? Do they have EcoVadis, etc.? So that's the questionnaire that we'll be launching and will be available from APC. So it's great to hear that we're all kind of thinking along the same lines, and Matt's already provided the link to the Edinburgh Pathway. So let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really, really exciting stuff. I think that's the thing. We're really, as a sector, tackling some of these capacity challenges that we're all facing. It also helps the supply chain ultimately for asking the same questions and getting the same data back. So, as I mentioned, not necessarily for this year, but it's great to see actually down the line. We don't have to feel sometimes this is overwhelming, as pointed out, some paralysis sometimes, but actually we are making headway in various areas. Really, really great to hear. Conscious we're just an hour, so let's take a 10-minute break. You can refill cups of tea and coffee, do some sun salutations, whatever you need to do. But we'll come back at 3:10 for the next bit. So thanks everybody, folks. All right, so that's just gone 10 past, so we'll get started on the next bit. So this last bit, we've got adaptation and wider influence. So the adaptation section is going to be a bit more in depth as well, and then wider influence a bit like such. But I'll share my screen again. Okay, so one of the rationales for focusing today on the adaptation piece is that we're finding some sector trends. There's been a big reduction in institutions reporting mitigation activities as part of the adaptation section. So that's really positive. There's less narrative around reducing emissions when really this section, that tab on adaptation, is really about adaptation action. So we can see that here from the SSN analysis report. We're also finding that 70% of institutions, based on last year's report, are either evidencing no climate risk assessment or have very limited climate risk assessment. So, for example, if it's limited, it's often just meaning we just looked at precipitation, so rainfall and flooding. And then further down in the question set, it talks about how do you support the national adaptation program, and we find that institutions aren't referencing perhaps as clearly as they could how their action is supporting the national plan. So there's 8 questions, but with just in mind, where the sector's at, really focusing on the 4 main ones where we can see actually we can make hopefully some quick wins here. So the first one, in terms of has the body assessed current and future climate risks? Again, here's an example framing. And we find institutions sometimes have a climate risk and they say, we have one for current climate risk and it's available if requested. What is really helpful is if you can add this information. The example framing here is the latest climate risk assessments for your institution were completed on this date by this staff role or committee. It covers our UK operations, for example. So recognizing if you have international campuses, perhaps that's not been done yet. And critically as well, assessed current climate risks include, and just bullet pointing which climate risks have been considered. So snow, high winds, heavy rainfall, for example, drought. You can still add the risk assessments can be provided on request. And if you haven't assessed future climate risks, just put that as a note. No future climate risk assessments have been completed to date. So it's quite high level still, but really what Scottish Government are after is just trying to understand, okay, which specific climate risks have you looked at and considered? That's all this question is asking for in terms of that level of detail. That is fine. Building out on, if you've done a future climate risk as well, do pop that in, and I'd suggest putting it in bold as well, just to really highlight it in the text. So assessed current and future climate risks include, and do the list if it's the exact same, or you can separate out into 2 and just say these are the risks we've assessed for our current climate risks. Here's our list assessed for future ones, because maybe there's an increase in wildfire risk that it wasn't there currently, for example. So it might be a little change. But this is level information they're after. Now, what we find in terms of what arrangements have been put in place to manage climate change risks, often I think there's an assumption in the sector that it has to be quite big in the states in terms of, we've redone the roofing, for example, to improve drainage. But I'm pretty sure most colleges and universities have controls in place, but they're just maybe not viewed as being a sort of an adaptation measure. So this is another example of framing. The institution manages climate change risks through its, you can name a strategy. If it's any climate risk is included in the institutional risk register, then drop that in as well. And if there's any action plans, it's embedded in. But as I say, most of these actions, I'd imagine the vast majority of institutions have through their health and safety policies. So established risk management and adaptation actions include, in bold is the hazard, in italics is the control. So for example, snow, access to campus and car parks may be affected due to snow and ice. There's a gritting contract in place, and the concierge will do snow clearing. and assist if possible. You know, wind disruption to public transport, there's going to be a weather notice, staff will be allowed to travel different hours. Should there be any stranding on campus, temporary accommodation is provided for staff, for example. So I imagine institutions have this sort of data there, but it might be setting in more of a health and safety report. And all you got to do, like this is an example from City of Glasgow College, copy and paste. And it's as simple as that. And that's showing adaptation measures there. You might have done more structural stuff, so sustainable urban drainage. You might be thinking Edinburgh College, perhaps with the energy efficiency work going on around cladding, water tightness. There might be co-benefits where it's actually a mitigation activity, principally better insulating our buildings, but that can also help in an adaptation sense. So better cooling in summer, better retention of heat in winter, for example. So draw out these things, but as a minimum, I think draw on the health and safety risk assessments there. In terms of 4D, questions where applicable, what contribution has the body made to delivering the programme? The programme refers to whatever the current national adaptation plan is. So this is SNAP 3 at the moment. And there's a range of outcomes and objectives as part of this plan. So you've got the 6 outcomes and then the listed objectives. And just to pull out some of these, because it's a lot, it's I think 160 pages as well. So not expecting everybody to read that. But just pulling out some that your institution might be able to explicitly reference. So for example, if your institution is part of a regional adaptation network that's supporting knowledge sharing, upskilling, collaboration. So for example, they have the PSCAN networks that I know people on the call are part of, reference that in there. So that's supporting 021 regional and place-based collaborations, and also 3.1. So you're improving public policy duties and capacity to support those. If you have climate risk action plans in place, like the examples I showed before, that supports objective 3.2, public service and infrastructure resilience, the ability to still deliver a quality service in the face of a climate event. So that points to that. If your procurement activity really supports community wealth building, that supports this last bit, climate resilient economic development and supply chains. If you're a university or a college that does research, there could be multiple outcomes across here that your institutional research supports. So there might be a question, if you do an SEG Accord or your Times Higher Impact rankings, for example, you might be able to quite quickly identify some research themes that you might be able to hang on to these different objective areas. Similarly, if you're a college and you're piloting the Scottish Qualifications Authority's Next Gen Higher National Qualifications, that can support outcome 5 broadly around economy, business and industry. It is a lot, but I think we can at least identify a few areas and be explicit in the Public Bodies Report about that. So an example here from a college looking, so for example, objective 2 or outcome 2, communities and community resilience objective, again, providing staff temporary accommodation if they're stranded. There's support for active travel, cycle to work schemes using alternative modes of travel there. That's also increasing community resilience. Facilitating digital learning and teaching if campus is closed. That aligns with public service and infrastructure resilience as well. So you can then be quite explicit in this example framing. And this might be everything, but at the moment, the answers usually aren't explicit in what outcome or objective they're supporting. So an area I think we can get some quick wins on there. So again, just an example framing for institutional research. The institution carries out research that supports the following objectives and outcomes, and just list them. An example of the research can be found here. And a final one for this point, what arrangements does the body have in place to review future and current climate risk? An example framing, if you have a strategy in place, name drop it, what's the dates it runs to and when will it be renewed? Again, identifying when the latest climate risk assessments do if you don't, have that explicit title, climate risk assessment, do use health and safety assessment, for example. When were they last reviewed and by who? How are these signed off in terms of committees, etc. And what's your plans for the next 12 months ahead to the next report? So, for example, over the next 12 months, the institution will review its future climate risk, and there's a variety of tools there you can name drop, and this will be led by, it could be a committee, it could be an individual staff member there. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and again, just give you a moment for reflections, anything coming up there. This is